If you're not uncomfortable talking about that purpose, you're not doing it enough as a leader.
So maybe to kick us off, maybe you can just talk us a little bit through the fundamental changes you see in the space industry, what new challenges are emerging, and what is sort of the basic shift and the required shift in mindset for operators there.
So first, I'm really glad to be here. Everybody knows this university, and I'm just really excited to be here, especially because I believe that so many of the ventures that need to be funded also in Switzerland have people who are here right now. You know, kind of the great ventures are people who are innovators, techies, working with people who really understand how to build the startups, and many of them are right here. So see, what's happening is really quite remarkable, and it's happening really quickly. Something like 15 years ago, I started a master's program at the University of Michigan. It's one of the top 3 aerospace programs, and it was focused on space systems. We did a program. At the end of the program, there were 5 organizations that recruited the students. One of them was NASA. One of them was called Northrop Grumman. One of them Lockheed Martin, Boeing, so forth. So it's like 5 organizations. Today, same program is there, adjusted, and the people who are recruiting, there's like 20 plus companies, and many of them can't get into the recruiting firm. And these companies are all companies that did not exist 15 years ago. And what really happened, and that the indication of that, what really happened is that, frankly, there was this crazy company called SpaceX that was not the first company. It was a company that was really in people's face because of the loud CEO was there, and who started attracting top talent because of the vision, and started attracting interest, and basically that model of kind of an entrepreneurial company doing work that normally only kind of stationary kind of government contractors could do. That first proof of existence, so to say, really opened the floodgates. So in every field, you have kind of what you would call old space. It's very disrespectful for many people, but let's just define those as companies that existed 15 years ago. And a large fraction, and the fast and often the leading fraction, is new space. So there are new companies that went there, and it's not just in the US. The second most launches come from a company in New Zealand called Rocket Lab. So it's kind of, and by the way, funded out of the US in part. You know, money moves easily. You have good ideas, money moves. But, you know, so they were funded there. And so what you have is a field that's very much entrepreneurially driven, anywhere from Earth observations to infrastructure, driven by companies that are there and frankly are imposing a much faster time scale. The size is huge. The industry used to be a side industry. It's close to $500 billion per year now. We expect by the end of the 30s for it to be twice that much, $1 trillion. So it's a huge industry that is commanding a lot of attention. Last year it grew 8%. That's during many of the industries went down. It grew 8% because of some of this commercial work. The other thing is because of the military moving into space. So a lot of investments went into that. Of course, the military is also a buyer of some of these technologies. A discussion one can have later.
Yeah, so interesting. And when you describe the sort of general industry trends, was that informing your vision for NASA when you took over, right? I understand you had a very specific outlook, so maybe you can just set the stage for us. What was the organization you were encountering, and what was your ambition for the organization when you set out in the job?
So I did that master's program in space systems, and the one thing I actually did was a crazy idea. I came up with the idea because I talked to Larry Page. He's one of the founders of Google, and I met him because he was the graduation speaker, and kind of like, oh, there's a space guy. He said, sit down, I have 3 ideas. Image the Earth every day, internet worldwide, and flying cars. He pitched them all within 10 minutes or so. And basically what I did is I said, okay, what I'm gonna do is I'll solve big problems, and I made the whole class a consulting company. So I worked for a customer, like for Google. and the first imagers that all the technology on Street View think my student did that, right? So there's a lot of stuff we did, and so basically what happened, the university leadership came to me, is like, look, we need that everywhere, not just in your field. So I started an entrepreneurship program, and frankly I could barely spell entrepreneurship because I'm a astrophysicist, right? So I never knew that's who I really am. I am a person who likes to do these kind of entrepreneurial adventures, and frankly that's why I was hired into NASA. So I got into an organization that was very much focused on the way I defined old space, but was dragged along by new space, and nobody on the inside knew the language. So it's almost like, I imagine some of these biblical scenes, people screaming at each other in different languages, not understanding. And I was one of the first people in who actually understood, he's a pre-seed company. Don't believe him. Not because he's lying to you. His job is to kind of sell his idea, buy into the vision. His job is, he's still looking for his business model. It's not there yet, right? So help him, but be a first customer, right? That's what the government can do. So that's what I did, and I spent 6.5 years, and probably did something, what I would say, 12 entrepreneurial experiments, where entire program areas we just tried to rewire using this entrepreneurial energy.
Could you explain a little bit how to introduce in a rather, I would say from a distance, in a rather monolithic organization, old style, linear driven, risk averse, as NASA is considered to be, how to get their entrepreneurial thinking? Because there's a certain contradiction also between entrepreneurship and failure, and kind of the core business of NASA is, at least if we think to send something up in the air, not to fail.
So
how do you manage that dilemma?
Yeah, the one thing I tried really hard before I did anything, and frankly I told them I'm not going to do anything in 100 days. That was actually a smart idea. I was much smarter than I ever thought. Because everybody's like, I'm paying it. The first 100 days, it all matters. And I basically said, I don't care where you were before, like how you did. Everybody starts at 0. I want to see in 100 days what we're doing. So what happened is I went in and I basically said, our goal is to achieve excellence. Excellence is not very good. Excellence is also not best among peers. That's not excellence. Leaders define excellence by how good are we relative to our potential. And I started asking questions. Is this excellent? Why does it take 3 months to make a decision that should take 3 hours? That's not excellent. So I started asking questions. And what happened over time, they started asking questions too. It's like, this is crazy. Like, why are we not and of course I realized everybody around the table was older than me, looked like me. And frankly, they made decisions like all snapping to judgments. And so for me, what I really wanted to do is not say you need to change. I wanted to say we're not good enough. We're not good enough because we're not at the level of excellence. Once I got buy-in on that, people, I remember the first annual evaluation, I said, every one of my direct reports, you have to do one experiment. I don't care whether it's successful or not, with one experiment in which you try something new that could make us better as an agency. And you have to explain why you do it. You have to explain what you're expecting, and then we'll see. And what happened at the beginning is like, well, I don't need to experiment. You're not going to work here if you don't experiment, right? So basically what happened is we started experimenting, and all of a sudden the discussion opened, because when you start experimenting, it's clear you may fail. So for me, failure, I never talked in isolation. I don't want to take massive risks. I don't want to take any risks I don't need to take. But to achieve that other goal, it is worth taking the risk. So let's achieve goals that are worth taking risks for. And when you create that culture, you all of a sudden and by the way, some never got on board. I replaced 50% of my team within the first 3 years.
Okay,
right? So it's not the case that everybody will come on, but many of them did. right? So, and frankly, often what I did when I say I replaced the team, often I took a strategic thinker was in a tactical position and made him strategic because they were mismatched, right? Because I wanted to build an organization in which we're like banging against the door, like we want to do other things, right? And I want to scare the bejesus out of anybody who wants to compete against us. I want to massively go faster. I want like China once could go to the moon by so and so. Well, we'll go 5 times in that time period. That's exactly the program I built. And I basically said, I'll take more risks. I went to Congress, said, you want to do that? I can only do it at 50% chance. Can you buy into that? By the way, it costs you less money than to do the other version. 50% chance, it's still a factor of 2 better, more effective. Do you want to do that? And the Congress said, yeah, it's a good idea. We have competition. So all of a sudden, you have new stakeholders at the table, and they also become a voice on Capitol Hill. Yes, we're talking about failure from the word go. We basically said only 50% will be successful. So it's that kind of energy you bring in, and all of a sudden the company says, like, this is totally new. We should do that more often. So people who run these, like, wow, I'm important all of a sudden, right? So, but it all starts with the necessity to innovate, right? So for me, many organizations, they don't spend enough time trying to figure out why they need to change and actually understanding why they need to change and getting buy-in around that.
But I think doing experiments is extremely important and enable and empower people to do experiments. What I could guess was NASA at that time was a super difficult process organized organization with a lot of structures and processes where the individual can't change it. That was also my experience when I did systems engineering in the aerospace, where I taught a little bit kind of project management and systems engineering, and they said, I would do, but I have the other one. So the idea of getting collaboratively something better to overcome the silo is extremely important. How did you achieve that? How do you get collaborative advantage, how we call it?
I did not always achieve success doing that. So there's a number of experiments I tried to do, eminently sensible. I was never successful because there was always a room somewhere where I was not at, even if I had from the top directed. And remember, NASA is a lot more top-down than many of these organizations. So I can force a lot of changes by decree. By the way, you never want to do that. You want to bring people along with you because there's always, you don't want to twist people's arm. But nonetheless, I can do that. Even with that power, I was not able to change many things. Like we were over-managing small spacecraft. We were managing small spacecraft like they're of national importance. Like that's really stupid. We should get small spacecraft out every 3 years, not every 6 years. It's too long. It's too slow. Leadership means more technology into space, faster, and frankly, I spent 3-4 years on this, and I was not successful, getting rid of more bureaucratic load because they did it voluntarily because they were used to it. That is stupid. I couldn't figure out how to turn them off. So in some cases I was able to in projects, right? And the goal was to bring the leadership with me along, but just do not get the sense that I transformed the whole agency. There were areas I managed to transform. The biggest success was to bring in a new world and scale it. And frankly, take the oxygen off the old world. That's a much faster way of doing that. You bring new stakeholders with you, and frankly, you starve out the old one, right? In many ways, my biggest successes were of that nature, and I hate that about it, right? I wish the other thing worked, but I would, frankly, it took me a while to learn that, and some of these things, I burned so much energy on the old way, trying to, boil the ocean. It just, the bureaucracies, especially in big government organizations, together with the contractors, they're so not interested to change. It takes an external forcing function that's way, way harder. You need to, like a national threat. By the way, Department of Defense in the US right now is going through that translation. Because all of a sudden the competition, international competition, is a true threat. And it's clear that the old-fashioned does not work. We're too slow. So kind of you're looking down a barrel, right? I mean, kind of like the Israeli defense minister once told me, there's nothing that focuses you more than the shadow of the guillotine of the guy who tries to kill you. And for me, kind of, it's a little bit brutal, but I feel the same way. Kind of threats are very much welcome.
Threats and sense of urgency, that was SpaceX certainly a vehicle for that. We once discussed with John Hennessy, the former president of Stanford University, chairman of Alphabet, and he once told us, you can't transform like a large organization like even Stanford University. You have to build new fields and just let the old fields work, reduce the investment in them and build new one. Is that a way how you also work within NASA? But you can't kind of stop certain programs because programs are there. And I imagine kind of the challenge is even much harder than changing a university, which is also close to impossible.
Basically, I use the same words he did, kind of a little bit more brutally. I say you start new programs and take the oxygen off the old one. Right, kind of that. I literally use the same strategy.
But they are long-term programs. That's the problem. You have the budget for many years already, so it's not an immediate.
So what you do is you build the new program, and after a while you run them against the old program, and you take the winner.
Okay.
So what you do? I mean, that's what's happening right now. I mean, SpaceX. Many people think of SpaceX as Elon Musk. Think Gwynne Shotwell. That's the person you need to talk to. Gwynne Shotwell is the chief operating officer. She is the translator. Like if you go into the government and you basically say, and by the way, the reason it's so important to talk about it, she is the business brains behind that. Like, why do you trust SpaceX? Gwynne. Like Elon makes some crazy statement online, which, everybody says, Gwynne called me, we're fine. Right, so for me, that personal trust. See, what happened is at the beginning was just this kind of amazing kind of say when I say crazy, I never mean a negative thing. I mean something that's out there, that's unusual. We don't know what box to put it in, and so basically SpaceX was that, but then it grew up. All of a sudden, like they achieved the same success as the company next to them that has 30 years of experience. And they do it in a different fashion that scales better. So all of a sudden, in normal competitions, they're winning. I don't need to change the competition. I just need to make sure I don't bias against them. All of a sudden, the astronauts go to the most important cargo you could possibly put on any rocket is on the commercial rocket. And so it takes the energy out of the old space. And frankly, they're still standing around. But I bet in 10 years it's over. Because it makes no sense. Every single discussion, when you want to save money, is like, look, there's this colossal thing over here. It's only propped up by by the pressure of the local congressional delegation. And eventually no state can do that. It will crumble. And so basically what you do is you take the oxygen, but then run the competitions, and then the new world survives. And of course, it becomes the old world also. Never forget. The other old world also started new. And but I'm with Hennessy. I mean, kind of that. Nevertheless, I spend a lot of time kind of arguing with the old world, because I thought it was really important that they understood why they're going down. And kind of saying, why are you doing this? The legal department, you're stopping your engineers from doing the right thing because of this stupid over-interpretation. That's not the law. There's not a single case in Supreme Court that you're using, and you're stopping it. You are the problem. Do you see? You're creating the problem that you're solving. It's not actually there. And so basically, and I think kind of as a government leader, I felt that was my job too. Right? Yes, I built these new worlds, but I also give the old world a chance. And in some cases, I managed to switch because they said, that makes all the sense in the world. But I do not interpret that I was at the 80th percentile successful.
How do you manage the cultural change between a large organization and a small one? That is not necessarily just because it's NASA, it's all a large automotive company. They all have challenges to work with startups because the dynamics are different, the planning horizons are different, the the speed of decision making is different, kind of everything is different. SpaceX seems to build up more easily an ecosystem because they all just grew from a new young organization. And how do you do that? What is your practice? How to change that?
So first of all, I mean, the first question that you have to ask, why is the traditional organization, the big organization, so much slower? And of course, in part, it is because of bureaucracy. And it's like, how does bureaucracy happen? Bureaucracy happens because of something that is very healthy turning into something unhealthy by individuals who are trying to do the right thing.
Yes, trying
So
to do
it's
the right thing.
it would be really easy to be angry at bureaucrats if they weren't so good, right? Somebody says, I'm in charge of mission assurance. I figured out a way to make your mission a little bit more safe, but you need to do this extra document. And I'm like, is that worth it? Somebody needs to say no. See, what Elon Musk has been able to do is basically say, we say no. Like the first answer is no to any process. Kind of, and frankly, almost aggressively no. And we will try to shed process at every step along the way. So what happens if the organization that constantly is improving, and frankly, some of them, and that's why it's so important to business majors, kind of what happens, there's a way to exist as in a business sense, and a lot of it comes out of the business function, also from engineering, but a lot of from the business function. It's trying to kind of efficiency-focused business leadership, as opposed to effectiveness-focused business leadership. So basically, we make small changes that are going forward. So what happens is every decision now has to check all these boxes. Again, every one of these decisions made sense in a macro sense, but we create it's almost like fat on the ribs. Like I wanted to eat that extra thing or whatever reason, and now I can barely get up the mountain, right? So for me, what then happens is a language that's process focused on the inside of the big org, whereas the startup is very much an effectiveness focused on. So it's an efficiency organization with an effectiveness organization. And when they come together, they can't understand each other. So the only way to really deal with that is to first make sure that there's advocates for the new organization on the inside of the old one. And frankly, it's a very tough job because you're constantly in the middle of antibodies. But in that job, what you do is you become an advocate around the process table. Why this is an idea? And it has to be with arguments that they can understand and they can agree with. Like, for example, we want to build a rocket that astronauts can go to the space station from US astronauts from the US. That's the argument for SpaceX. You should know, roughly a year before the first trial run happened to the space station, I was in a meeting with all of NASA leadership where the head of mission assurance said we should drop SpaceX because we don't understand them. So be aware that that struggle is real, right? It's really, and by the way, he's a good man. I admire him in many different ways. I'm like, this is incredible. There's something historic happening here. So again, it's language, bringing in advocates. The advocate for NASA was a woman who basically came from the business side, was an advocate for SpaceX on the inside, called Kathy Leaders. She basically punched it through. She knew enough technology, understood the company, and helped them because they needed help also, right? So it really is kind of reaching across, jumping across the chasm, and then creating success. At the end, success is what makes you scale.
So these sort of translators, I find that very, very interesting because I think one of the things we observe also in our research is that a lot of innovation happens collaboratively in these kind of ecosystems where organizations have to have to leverage each other's competencies, right? So let's maybe dive a little bit more into detail about these translators. Like where do they come from? Do you strategically recruit them maybe from the other world? Do you need some people with startup experience in an organization like NASA? Do you create a specific function, or how do you go about strategically nurturing these translators?
So let me just ask one question that you asked. Do you need people with startup experience in big companies or in the government? The answer is yes. Absolutely yes. Because in the absence of that, see, the translation the other direction is also important. I remember sitting in Germany, forgot which town, over a beer with the CEO of a startup, and we came up with the program that is now the commercial data buy program. Because I basically, it's like, here's my care abouts. Like what I told them is like, I cannot buy data and do fundamental science in which the data are not public in some way, because otherwise the data are not reproducible. The only science I care about, I'm about excellent science, is reproducible results. If the data are kind of, I know you want your data. And of course, I had worked with Google, so I knew the value of his data decays rapidly. So I basically, okay, so he said, what are the, and I basically said, look, I'll give you more money for you to give that up, but don't give me new data because you're making money in your primary business model. I'll be a secondary market for you. And I knew what the money difference is at Google from the peak to 3 days later, where, it decays to 15% of the value or 10% of the value. So I knew what that is. And so we made up the model. And then I went and talked to some other companies and we talked. So in other words, the other direction is also important, not just the startup person in, also the government person out. Like, here's what I cannot get over because I have this policy. There's no way around it. How do we make that happen? So yes, you deliberately organize, you deliberately hire them. In many of the programs, I actually brought in people sometimes just and what's really important to me is that you don't have to commit for your lifetime. I want you to be here for 2 years, then go back into your next startup. And you're going to struggle here. It's not going to be comfortable, but you do a service to your country. Like that's the way I would argue at NASA, or you do a service to your industry, to your own, but come here and help us. The reverse is also true. Bring a person who's been in the kind of big time thinking, drop them into the startup and kind of listen to them. Like, what are the opportunities they see? It's like, this is what we normally do. There's many problems we solve for SpaceX from NASA. They had technical problems they could not solve. It's like, hey, we're going to help you. And there's tremendous respect at the technical level, right? So for me, nurturing that is really, one of the things I care a lot about is language. Like, I want you to know, I learned that when I built a campus-wide entrepreneurship program. There were a lot of negative things said about different schools. And I was in the engineering school, and we had a lot of jokes about the business school, about the intelligence and everything. And I basically realized I'm the problem if I allow that. So basically, I basically said, we will no longer talk about our partners that way. The only way we're going to be successful is if we respect each other. They're great at what they're doing. We need to learn what they're great at. We need to tell them what we're great at, but we will adjust the language. And frankly, I have solved many problems, also international collaborations, in which I insisted on the right language and in the team and kind of, for me, we will treat the others like partners even if we don't understand them. And we will be successful together. So for me, it's yes, it's people exchange, but it's also opening the space to really create that partnership by adjusting the language and the leadership behavior in which you get out of the kind of idea of we're against each other, to basically say there's multiple ways of doing this. Let's learn from each other.
What is the role of purpose and strong goals, stretched goals in this collaboration, successful collaboration?
Absolutely important, because it's a unifier. With stretch goals, we can agree with very different backgrounds. We want to go there. We want to go to the moon, have humans on Mars. It's super hard frankly, it's so hard. We cannot possibly be successful if only a small fraction of us are there. And so for me, big goals, like I think, remember, I'm an astrophysicist. I think, it's like, it's the star in the sky we're marching towards. Like we do turns, but this is always there. It's up there. So for me, it is the most important element of a team. Frankly, again, there is no shortcut. If you're not doing that first, you will pay for it dearly. You need to make, and frankly, you need to talk about it more. If you're not uncomfortable talking about that purpose, you're not doing it enough as a leader, right? Because they don't hear it as often as you say it. But you need to say it with the technicians in the room, you need to say it with the politicians in the room, and it's the same message, not a different message. You need to say it with your international partners in the room. So talk about leadership, like with international partners in the room. I did it. This is why we do this, and this is why our partnership with you is so important. Like,
do you think that changed the explaining of why we're doing it and what's the goal we're trying to reach? Did that change? I mean, we all know the Kennedy speech in the 60s and the reaching the moon, but has it changed, or did the quality of language change, the way we communicate as leaders?
Without a doubt, at NASA it has changed.
How?
Without a doubt. Well, I mean, the Kennedy speech is a speech that relates to a competition between a power that scared everybody on Earth, the Western world, and basically, instead of going to war with them, let's demonstrate superiority by going to the moon. Before the decade is down, we'll do it not because it's easy, because it's hard. Every civil servant, every contractor needs to work at the speed of freedom. Like also there, the speed matters, right? So I mean, I've used that speech so many times, but where we are today, right, is a much more complicated world. It's a world in which there is competition, which a competition that worries the Western world tremendously, worries the US. But it's also competition, it's also opportunity that is there, or questions that are there that are really motivating us. Like, never forget that close to 60-70% of all the data that we're showing each other to show that our planet is changing comes from space, right? So that purpose is really important for the Earth Science program. We're here to we're the front row view of our planet to help humanity deal with that planet. So for me, it's still the leadership piece with Congress, but I think if you go look at the community, there's prevailing motivators that are different, right? So it's a more differentiated message. By the way, the Earth Science piece was always in the NASA message. But the going to the moon before the decade is down was a communication not only to your own workforce but also to your competition.
Maybe in sort of getting to the end piece, because I know you have a follow-up schedule. Maybe if you just reflect on the time, we talked a little bit about what you did. I mean, how did it change you as a leader? Like, what would you do maybe also differently? How has your perspective evolved? Because we talked a lot about sort of how your experience shaped your approach, but how has it evolved during this transformation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think on the one hand, there's a number of things I'm less sure about. For example, you read a book and here's what good leaders should do. Then you see somebody else who's really successful over there is using a very different tool set. And I think I'm a lot more, and recently I gave a talk somewhere, and, a former SpaceX person asked me, it's like, why would somebody go work at SpaceX? Because it's so hard and terrible and is expected to work at. My point is, there's a person who has an environment that is very